Hey everyone, Brian Zane here with another classic pay-per-view review as nominated by my Patreon backers. This week, it's still November, still Survivor Series month, so this week I'm reviewing Survivor Series 1995 from November 19th in Landover, Maryland, technically, even though it was frequently billed as suburban Washington, D.C. It's nominated on by Mark Blassie. Thanks so much for the suggestion, Mark. 14,000, actually more than 14,000 are in attendance here. It's a very, I think, a symbolic pay-per-view. It really shows like some of the best of what the new generation has to offer. They've filtered out all the crappy, day job gimmicks, and you've got mostly, the cream of the crop in terms of new generation. But also, it really signifies a seismic shift in not only the makeup of the roster, but also how those in the roster are portrayed and positioned. This show took place on a Sunday night. It was the first Survivor Series in history not to take place on Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving Eve. That used to be the tradition for Survivor Series. Of course, at this point, it is no more. Vince McMahon, Jim Ross, and Mr. Perfect are on commentary. This is Perfect's debut as color commentator here. He's back after being gone for a year, rehabilitating a back injury. So it's the first time back on TV, and I think he really did a good job doing commentary here on this show. I think I have to say he's, in my opinion, better than Roddy Piper on commentary. I think it's just a matter of taste. I think Mr. Perfect is more subdued on commentary than Piper is. The Piper's just always on. He's always like at level 11, but I guess it's a matter of, what you like more out of your commentators as far as taste goes. Our first match of the evening is a Survivor Series elimination match as the Underdogs, Marty Jannetty, Barry Horowitz, Hakushi, and Sparky Plugg, aka Bob Holly, taking on the BodyDonnas. That's Skip, Tom Pritchard, Rad Radford, and the 1-2-3 Kid. Let's talk about how terrible that team name is, by the way, the Underdogs. Like, hey, look at the makeup of that team. You know they're underdogs. They're pretty much jobbers. Don't need to rub it in their faces, people. Also, I think Hakushi is kind of the outlier in that group. Of all the people who are considered underdogs, Hakushi is kind of like which of these things is not like the other. I feel like Hakushi, he was ahead of his time in America, at least in terms of the style he presented. He was really doing what a lot of people weren't doing at that time, especially in the US. I think his biggest claim to fame in the WWF was having that high-profile feud with Bret Hart, but really nothing else came of that for his run there. And so this is kind of like his last gasp before he's eventually released from the company. The 1-2-3 Kid is a recently turned heel. He turned heel, I think, the previous week on Raw, joining the $1 Million Corporation. He's replacing what was billed as Jean-Pierre Lafitte in the BodyDonnas team. In kayfabe, it's explained that Ted DiBiase bought out Jean-Pierre's spot in the match and gave it to the 1-2-3 Kid, though in reality, Jean-Pierre Lafitte actually was released from the company and a whole bunch of backstage heat with the Clique. That is not the only time you'll be hearing that phrase used in this review, by the way. So he's gone and 1-2-3 Kid is in, and the really underlying story here that we'll see in this match and also later in the show is that the 1-2-3 Kid has now turned his back on Razor Ramon, the current IC champion. Of course, during this time, the Kid was the protege of Razor Ramon. So during this whole match, as the 1-2-3 Kid advances in the match, you see Razor getting more and more incensed. They cut back occasionally to locker room footage where he's watching on the monitor, and he gets so mad that the Kid is doing as well as he is in this match. Breaking down some more people in this match, Rad Radford, who is the late Louis Piccoli, was a BodyDonna in training. He was kind of tagging along with Skip at this time, so he would do kind of like the push-ups. He would try and like fit in with them, but it was just such a big old clash of styles because Rad Radford he represented grunge, and Skip was just the opposite of that. So Dr. Tom, who is in this match as himself, he's doing the Heavenly Bodies gimmick. 1 month later, he would become Zip of the BodyDonnas. He would cut all his hair off and dye it bleach blonde and team with Skip, and they would become tag team champions in the next year. Barry Horowitz really symbolized the team name of the Underdogs. Really, his biggest moment was earlier this year when he had beat Skip. So when he beat Skip, it was a big deal for him, but it also kind of killed Skip's momentum, and that plays a little bit into this match here. In this match, 1-2-3 Kid is responsible for a lot of eliminations, either by cheap shot when he's not the legal man, or when he does a blind tag and gets a pinfall later on. At one point, before the final two, you've got Marty Jannetty and Skip wrestling. Marty hits a top rope powerbomb onto Skip, and to me that came out of nowhere. Like, I never would have expected in a million years Marty Jannetty would hit a top rope powerbomb on anyone, and that was just, to me, it was one of the coolest spots of the night. So I give all the credit in the world to Marty and Chris Candido for that one. It's down to Marty and the Kid as the final two men in the matchup. Psycho Sid, who's also a member of the $1 Million Corporation, comes out at ringside. Ted DiBiase gets on the apron to distract, and while that happens, Sid drops Marty throat first onto the top rope. The 1-2-3 Kid rolls up Marty to win the match. He is the sole survivor. I'll give this match 2.5 stars out of 4. A lot of good storyline advancement and continuation for a lot of different people. A lot of cool cross-threading between the different people in this match. Even though it's a team full of jobbers, they still had things going on, which I think is kind of beautiful about that time period in WWF. And I think I was a little harsh in my critique of Survivor Series 90. I was kind of lacking appropriate context because I wasn't really growing up watching at the time, so I kind of was flippant about some of the matchups, so I regret doing that. My apologies now for the way that review went. I hope to hopefully, you know, do a better job with this review as the Survivor Series matches go on. The next Survivor Series match is a big old Joshi showcase. You've got Bertha, Faye, Aja Kong, Tomoko Watanabe, and Lioness Asuka versus Alundra, Blayze, Kyoko Inoue, Saki Hasegawa, and Chaparita Asari. I hope I got all those names right. Interesting point about Lioness Asuka is the fact that her name is spelled like Asuka, the Asuka we know today, but it is pronounced Asuka, all 3 syllables, yet the sides of her boots say ASKA, like Asuka, so it's just kind of confusing. Like I mentioned, this is pretty much a huge showcase of Japanese women's wrestling. You know, Alundra Blayze, Medusa Michelli, she made her name in Japan before coming to the WWF, so it makes sense that, you know, a lot of her, basically the bulk of her feuds and her matches in her time with this company were basically her old opponents and compatriots from Japan, so they just brought them over specifically to wrestle Alundra Blayze here, and that's kind of what this match was as well. Let's talk about Bertha Faye. I mean, that is a weird gimmick, kind of like one of the top definitions of wrestle crap, you might say. You know, Rhonda Singh was legitimate Joshi wrestler. They sign her and they put her in this ridiculous looking gimmick. She's a comedy act, Harvey Whippleman, and it's just, you know, it's one of the many examples of the company taking someone, you know, who's kind of an intimidating figure and turning them into kind of like a comedy act. That's not the first time, not the last time you'll see something like this happen in the case of Bertha Faye. It was a fun match to watch. These women all had a chemistry because clearly they've all worked each other in the past in Japan, so it really played into this match as well. A good combination of like hard-hitting stuff and some high-flying work and just fast-paced, fun action here in this matchup. These women clearly had chemistry with each other because they've worked before in Japan, and it shows here. A good combination of like the hard-hitting maneuvers, some good striking, and some good flying attacks, especially from Chaparita Asari. Though I will admit at times it was kind of a match of confusing eliminations. At one point, Kyoko Inoue is being pinned by Aja Kong, but she kind of kicks out near the end, and there's some confusion as to whether or not she actually did kick out, but it was just kind of slowed the pace down there. Then a few minutes later, Alundra Blayze hit Tomoko Watanabe with a sequence of moves, and Tomoko kicks out. It doesn't seem like she's supposed to, because the way she gets up, then Alundra just hits her with one more move to put her away, where it seems like the natural conclusion would have been the previous sequence of moves, she should have stayed down for that. So who knows what was going on there. That was a bit awkward. It gets down to a 3-on-1 situation after Aja Kong's eliminated all of Alundra's partners. She's all by herself. She is able to eliminate Bertha Faye with a German suplex, but as soon as the pinfall happens and the 3 count is given, Bertha Faye just basically gets right up, rolls out of the ring, doesn't sell a thing, and just yells at Harvey Whippleman. Like she was in a hurry to get out of the ring as fast as she possibly could. It's eventually down to 1-on-1 Alundra Blayze and Aja Kong. They have a good work between the two here. It ends with Aja Kong with a spinning backhand to Alundra to win the match for her team. So Aja Kong cleans house. She does all the work pretty much by herself. She's the sole survivor. I give this match 2 stars. It was a good showcase of the Japanese female talent, although I felt it felt kind of rushed, and it also led to some awkward moments with the eliminations. Just some rough spots that kind of took me out of it. What's noteworthy about this match is that Alundra Blayze, the women's champion at the time, would not be long for the WWF after this show. She'd be released in December due to cost-cutting measures. Then she would be famously seen on Nitro shortly afterward, throwing the women's championship belt into a trash bin. And that would put her on the shit list in WWF for, God, I don't know, about 20 years. We go to the crowd area with Todd Pettengill, and of course this is taking place in suburban Washington, D.C., so you have to have Mr. President, this Bill Clinton impersonator, sitting at ringside watching the show with his Secret Service agents flanking him. I feel like over the decades, no president has been made fun of more by WWF than Bill Clinton. Like, they made fun of George W. Bush a little bit, they made fun of Obama a couple times as an impersonator, like they had him for capital punishment, but over the years, no one has been made fun of more regularly as a president than Bill Clinton. They make fun of him here, and there's a few more times we'll see him later in this show, and it's not a good look for Clinton. And then, you know, I remember one time very vividly, I believe it was the Raw or 2 before SummerSlam 98, right in the middle of Bill Clinton's impeachment trial, they had this like phone conversation where Jim Ross and the King were like on a phone call with the president, this Bill Clinton impersonator, on the phone, and where Bill Clinton's admitting to, you know, folks, I'm getting it on, I'm getting it done. Like, and I was like, what on earth is this? And even back in hindsight, looking back at this, even more insane they would do something like that. And then I remember in the 2008 2008 primaries, when it was Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in the Democratic primaries, you had the impersonator matched, Obama and Hillary, and Clinton, I think it was a different Clinton impersonator this time, who was there at ringside and just being, jolly, redneck, lecherous Bill Clinton. And it's, yeah, over the years, Bill Clinton has gotten a fair amount of abuse from WWF. And so I just think I don't think it's a coincidence. I'm not trying to make this a political argument or statement, but I think it's funny that Clinton is so often parodied by this company. It's not the last time we'll be seeing Mr. President on this show tonight. Our next match is Bam Bigelow taking on Goldust, who is less than a month into his run as his character here. He debuted the previous month at In Your House 4, so this is his second pay-per-view match against Bam. He hasn't gone full-blown, like, the straddling the line of homosexuality yet, but Vince is definitely going out of his way to describe him as strange, creepy, and androgynous. They just milk this entrance. This entrance, I feel like it takes as long as like half the length of the match itself. The theme even restarts to show you how long this entrance is taking. And let's take a look at the jumpsuit. And just first of all, what the hell is Goldust packing in that jumpsuit? If this video were in HD, you could tell what religion he was. This match is surprisingly one-sided in favor of Goldust here, because Bam Bam's a big dude, obviously, but Goldust really has his way with Bam Bam throughout the whole majority of the match. Bam Bam does get a couple hope spots in. At one point near the end, he makes a comeback, goes for a corner splash. Goldust moves out of the way and hits a running Bulldog to win the match, and that's pretty much it. It's 1.5 stars. I think for a squash match, it was a good squash match, because Bigelow did look strong in defeat for the most part, but even though he did get worked over a lot. Bigelow would leave the company right after this. This is his last time you saw Bigelow in the WWF. He had some major issues backstage with the Clique. Again, there's that phrase. And so if you listen to his old shoot interviews on YouTube, you'll know what I mean when he talks about his heat with the Clique. So he left and would soon wrestle for ECW for a bit, then would eventually go to WCW, where he would go on to form the Jersey Triad with DDP and Canyon. Right away, we go back to Todd Pettengill and Mr. President, who are joined by Mr. Backlund. Bob Backlund, who, as of this show, was the most recent WWF champion before the current champion, Diesel. What a weird time the mid-90s was in this company. He is in the middle of his, like, teasing the presidential run thing he was doing around this time. At one point, he's kind of browbeating Mr. President. He says he's asking if he's one of the 8,000 irrelevant federal government employees. But he's speaking at a register that I think is kind of low for the presidential impersonator to hear. I don't think he heard what Backlund was saying, because his response was very generic.
I never really thought about it that way, yeah. I got nothing else to do, so.
Our next Survivor Series match is the Royals. Jerry Lawler, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Isaac Yankem DDS, and King Mabel taking on the Darkside, Savio Vega, Henry Godwinn, Fatu, and The Undertaker, who is making his big return to TV after having his face crushed by King Mabel some time ago on Monday Night Raw. King Mabel was crowned king in the ring earlier in the year, and one of his biggest matches to date at this point was a title match against Diesel, which he did not win. But yeah, this is his big feud now. He's with The Undertaker. So he crushed Taker's face. Taker was gone for a while. Taker comes back with the Phantom of the Opera mask. This is the debut of that look, which is very memorable for a lot of fans of this era. And let's talk about Mabel's entrance. How shitty would it be to be one of the throne bearers for King Mabel? Because he's a big dude and he's on a big throne, and you got to carry all that with one of your shoulders, and you're sharing with 3 other dudes. That does not sound like a fun gig to have. Fatu, of course, is the future Rikishi. He is full into his like anti-street violence gimmick here, which is very true to life, because Rikishi recently, at that point, had recently survived being shot in the stomach in a drive-by shooting. That explains the giant scar on his stomach that you might have seen. It's also cool to see the Future Authority members Triple H and Kane sharing a side of the ring together. And I think it's just so cool, because if you look at this match, think of how many people are in this ring alone that will be just stars in the next boom period. You've got Triple H, Kane, you've got The Undertaker, who's been around but will continue to be around. You've got Fatu, who will become Rikishi, who was over like Rover in 2000. Of course, Jerry Lawler still around the company then. You've got Henry Godwinn, who, even though he didn't amount to much, would become part of Southern Justice with Phineas Godwinn, and so he was still relevant at the time. And speaking of which, I don't know why Phineas isn't in this match per se, but yeah, I mean, just looking at the talent here, just looking at everyone involved and seeing where they're going to go in a few years, it makes it really cool to watch this particular match. It's also very fitting for the Taker to return in Survivor Series, since he debuted the previous 5 years at Survivor Series 1990, and just like in 1990, he comes back onto television with a very weird looking crew of guys. You've got a slot farmer, you got Savio Vega, and you got Fatu, the anti-street violence guy, and The Undertaker. Savio Vega takes a lot of punishment, pretty much the bulk of the offense from the heels in this matchup. He takes a sidewalk slam from Mabel. He also takes a big pile driver from Jerry Lawler, although he does kick out of it because Lawler takes too long to cover him, which I think is still kind of ridiculous. Although he does go to hit a second pile driver on a Savio, and I had to watch it twice because at first I thought Savio just no-sold, like totally strong style the pile driver, but I think what he did, he just blocked it because he gets right back up and just jumps over and tags Taker. The crowd is nuts. Taker eliminates Lawler, Yankem, and Triple H in quick succession with tombstones. Mabel does get some heat on Taker, and then as he's doing this little dance, Taker sits up and Mabel is terrified and runs away. He loses via countout. I just say I really enjoyed King Mabel's work in this match. Just, if you see during Taker's entrance, his reactions, his facial expressions when he sees Undertaker come out and he takes the hat off to reveal the Phantom mask, and then his fright when Taker sits up here at the end of this match. Great physicality by Mabel here. And I will admit, this is probably the first full match I've ever seen with King Mabel as this gimmick. I saw plenty of Viscera and Big Daddy V later on in his career, but I don't think I ever actually saw King Mabel. I haven't watched a whole lot of 1995, so this is kind of like new territory for me. So King Mabel, he pieces out, he runs up the ramp, he's counted out. The Darkside wins in a clean sweep. They beat up Sir Mo, who is of course accompanying King Mabel, and that's the whole thing. I give this match 2.5 stars. A good work by a good bunch of guys who would go on to do even better work in just a few years after this. Again, just seeing the potential on the upside of this eightsome. This 8 people. I don't think eightsome's a word, but you get what I'm saying. The upside with this is really awesome to see. This is a weird one. It's a wild card match with Yokozuna, Owen Hart, Dean Douglas, and Razor Ramon versus Shawn Michaels, Ahmed Johnson in his pay-per-view debut, by the way, Psycho Sid, and the British Bulldog. It's called the wild card match because all these guys, rather than having a face team and a heel team, they were pretty much selected at random, and so you've got faces and heels together in their own teams. Even the announcers don't know why these teams are put together this way. They just go, well, hey, interim president Gorilla Monsoon made this match, so we're not going to question it. Very interesting that Jim Cornette of Camp Cornette is playing both sides here, because you've got Owen Hart and Yokozuna on one team and British Bulldog, who completes the set, on the other team. He's actually in 2 backstage promos with each team, and the second time he shows up in the backstage promo is pretty hilarious.
Jim Cornette, I talked to you earlier on. You were with the opposing team.
Wait a minute, what are you talking about? You haven't talked to me. I'm seeing you all day. I've been getting the British Bulldog ready to win.
Along with Ahmed Johnson's pay-per-view debut, this is also Shawn's return to action, because 1 month earlier he was beaten up allegedly by the 9 Marines in that bar fight in Syracuse, so he'd be forced to relinquish the Intercontinental Championship to Dean Douglas, who would then lose it that same night to Razor Ramon. And so you've got all 3 parts of that whole story intertwined in this one match, with Douglas and Razor on one side and Shawn Michaels on the other. There's a great moment with Owen and Bulldog. You don't see these two interact much in the match together, but when they do, it's pretty cool, because they have this great moment where they shake hands and they deck each other in the head at the same time. I love that spot. It's such good chemistry here in the brief moment where they do some spots. Such great flow and chemistry. The work they do is just so fluid and beautiful, even for a fleeting moment. I loved watching that moment with Owen and Bulldog in the ring together. Shawn and Razor, of course, are friends here, part of the clique, IRL. They fight a little bit, but they also help each other out. At one point, Razor decks Dean Douglas and allows him to be eliminated. Then Shawn goes to hit Razor with a Sweet Chin Music when Sid is holding Razor up, but Razor ducks. Shawn hits Sid instead, doesn't care, and that leads to Sid being eliminated. Then he powerbombs Shawn for a good measure. Probably my favorite moment of commentary in this whole show is Mr. Perfect in this match, when he has a theory as to why he thinks Shawn Michaels gave up the IC belt.
You know, I'm not so sure how hurt Michaels was when he gave the belt up. He probably gave it to Douglas so he didn't get pinned.
Oh, no.
Shortly after Owen is eliminated with the Pearl River Plunge, you see 1, 2, 3 Kid and Psycho Sid make their way out to the ring. The distraction's enough to cause Razor Ramon to be eliminated by Bulldog's running power slam. Razor and Kid would continue to feud all the way until the spring of next year, when they were fighting in Your House 6, and they would fight in a crybaby match where the loser would have to wear a diaper, and the loser of that match was, you guessed it, the 1, 2, 3 Kid. The match ends when Ahmed Johnson body slams the hell out of Yokozuna, and even though Yoko maybe only made it 2 feet off the ground at the apex, it's always still impressive to see somebody lift the guy up and slam him, so it doesn't really get old. So to see Ahmed do it is really impressive. Then Bulldog gets in to try and break up the pin, because Yokozuna is his Camp Cornette partner, even though they're on opposite ends of the ring in this match. Shawn Michaels and Ahmed Johnson deck the Bulldog out of the ring. Ahmed does a big jumping splash onto Yokozuna to pin him and win. So you have Shawn Michaels, Bulldog, and Ahmed are the survivors in their match. I'm going to give this match 3 stars out of 4. I really enjoy this dynamic. Even though I was hesitant at first, the way they played it out, I think, was just masterfully done. Even having the faces and heels intertwining in their own teams, and the dynamic of that, like people costing each other eliminations and helping each other out and wrestling each other. Like nobody was healing on each other like as friends. Like Shawn and Razor didn't really heal on each other. Bulldog and Owen didn't do it. So I think keeping that kind of continuity was very important, and I think it played out very well that way. And it was just a really fun match to watch. I really enjoyed the stuff that we saw in that match. Interesting footnote here, the next night on Raw, you have Shawn Michaels and Owen Hart in a match together. Owen hits Shawn with an enziguri, and Shawn collapses in the middle of the ring. It's like, oh, his concussion from the bar fight in Syracuse has been aggravated. He has to retire. So they do a whole retirement angle for Shawn after this, which of course culminates in him returning in triumphant fashion at the Royal Rumble 1996 and eventually WrestleMania 12, which we'll get to in a little bit. We go back one last time to Todd Pettengill with Mr. President, who now has Sunny on his lap, and he's feeding her popcorn and throwing it down her cleavage of her dress, and it's just super awkward because, yes, we know that, you know, Bill Clinton was a lech and he had affairs while he was president, but do we really need to show that on this pay-per-view?
Nothing that I enjoy more than sitting back, enjoying some popcorn, and watching a perfect match.
Main event time as Diesel, the WWF champion, defends against Bret Hart in a no disqualification match. This is the third encounter these guys had for the title. The first one was at King of the Ring 94. The second was at Royal Rumble 95. Both ending inconclusively. One with a disqualification at King of the Ring, the other with no contest at Royal Rumble. So interim president Gorilla Monsoon adds the no DQ stipulation. There must be a winner. Of course, Diesel is the longest reigning champion of the decade at this point. He's in day 358 of his reign here after having beat Bob Backlund at Madison Square Garden in a house show in like less than 10 seconds in November of 1994. When the bell rings before the two even touch each other, both men just turn around and remove the turnbuckle pad behind them to have two exposed turnbuckles, which will definitely play into the match later on. This whole thing is just a brawl from start to finish. There's not a whole lot of like technical holds and counter holds in this matchup. It's just a big old fight. I've used this phrase before when I'm doing these classic reviews, but this match was beautiful in its brutality and its physicality. This was a hard-hitting, physical, knockdown, drag-out fight, and I loved every minute of it. This was, they painted a beautiful picture with the canvas they were given here. I'm not just talking about the ring canvas. They used the outside, the ring, and the ringside area was just all used to their advantage here. One of my favorite spots is when Bret takes an XLR cable from a camera, ties it around the turnbuckle, then ties it to Diesel's leg to keep from going anywhere so you can hit him a few times there. The exposed turnbuckle does come into play when Diesel throws Bret into it twice. He goes for a third time later in the match, but then Bret counters it and throws Diesel into it. At one point, Bret's on the apron. Diesel knocks Bret off, and he just goes crashing through the table, the Spanish announce table on the outside. It is one of the most fantastic, beautiful table breaks I've ever seen. It was clean, it was crisp, it had a good sound. All the stuff on the table went flying up. Diesel goes for the jackknife after dragging Bret back into the ring, but Bret goes limp. He is just knocked out after that table spot. So he goes to pick him up again, but then Bret plays possum, catches him in a small package to pin Diesel and win the match, and is the new WWF champion. Diesel immediately sits up and goes, "Motherfucker," which I think was, maybe it's just me, I think it might be an homage to when Bret was pinned by Ted DiBiase in Survivor Series 90, and then Bret immediately sits up and goes, "Fuck." So Diesel, now that he's mad and yells "motherfucker," he just gets more heat back on Bret Hart. He hits him with two jackknife power bombs and also beats up a couple of refs on the way out. This was not a full heel turn per se for Diesel. Like, he played kind of a tweener role. He embraced the fans he had. He eschewed the ones that didn't like him. That was kind of how it was. So he didn't fully hate all fans. He just the ones that didn't like him. Then, of course, by the end of his run in the company, by the end of that next year, he would play more of a full-fledged heel. And, of course, Bret would go on to hold the championship until WrestleMania 12, where, of course, he would lose to Shawn Michaels in the Iron Man match. But what a match. I give this one 4 stars. It is my favorite match of the night. And, you know, I mean, say what you will about Diesel's ability in the ring. And I know a lot of it came from working with Bret Hart, but this match was, again, a beautiful match. It told a terrific story of just the violence and the brutality. And you know going in what they had done to each other before that. The fact they had these 2 fights in the previous year or year and a half or so, and it didn't have a finish. So there's got to be a winner, and they just fight with every ounce of strength and vigor that they have, and it just works here. I love this match because both guys are like definitely faces. Diesel's kind of like teetering between face and tweener at this point because a lot of his face pos had diminished by this point, this late into his championship run. But I think it really worked well. I think for 2 guys who weren't heels, right? Diesel was definitely not a heel at this point. They definitely put on a hell of a show that the fans were fully invested in. My final grade for Survivor Series 1995 is going to be a B+. Nothing about this show I thought was bad. I didn't really hate anything in this show, except maybe for Mr. President, the Bill Clinton thing. Like, I've always hated presidential impersonators in my wrestling. I mentioned that in a Capital Punishment review. The same thing goes here. I did not care for the Bill Clinton impression. You know, just because you're in Washington, D.C. doesn't mean you have to go with the presidential impersonators. Not necessary. But as far as the matches go, nothing really stood out to me as a bad match. Like, the women's Joshi match, like, there were some rough spots, but overall it wasn't a bad match. Goldust and Bam Bam was kind of a squash, but it was still little fun squash. But as far as the matches I really liked, you know, Royals versus Darkside, that was a lot of fun. Again, seeing there's all that future amazing talent in there and seeing what they would all become. It's just cool to see them, you know, get their feet wet and put on a really good match here. Because Triple H had only recently debuted here as well. He was on an undefeated streak, I forgot to mention. And of course, the wild card match, terrific performance by all 8 guys in that thing. Bret and Diesel, that match, the world title match was, again, it was poetry in motion. It was great. I love that match so much. So B+ is my final grade for Survivor Series 95. Thanks so much to Mark Blassie for nominating this show for me to review. I had a great time watching it and reviewing it. If you want to play a role which shows I review in the future, be they good, bad, or somewhere in between, go to patreon.com/wrestlingwithwregret, become a $10 backer or above, and you'll have the opportunity to nominate shows for me to review in the future. Next time in 2 weeks on the Classic Review, I know by that point it won't be November anymore, technically won't be Survivor Series month, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this show on such a pivotal anniversary for it. Survivor Series 1997. Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, comment below, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at prowrestlingtees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.